Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from whichever part of the world you may be joining us. Welcome to the Maven API Tech Talk and Office Hours. Today we've got a really interesting session to all of you, so let's get things started. If this is one of your first time joining the Maven API community sessions, welcome to this community. This community was originated in Madrid by one customer engineer, Luis Collar, and Jimena, which I think Jimena is here, so if you can just wave your hand or something in the reaction. Thank you, Jime. Well, this community is designed for practitioners across the world for apigee and application integration technologies for Google Cloud. So welcome to this space designed to all of you for all things APIs and all things integration. We're so happy to have you joining us. With that, simple rules or simple walkthrough of what we cover in the sessions. You're always going to have a tech talk and like a demo presentation from a Google Cloud expert. And then at the end or throughout the session, we can have a Q&A for the session that was presented, or if you have any other topic that you would like to bring to the table, it's more than welcome. We're going to meet almost every Thursday with some exceptions. And these sessions will be recorded and you'll be able to find those available through the Google Cloud community, which now has changed to the Google Developer Program forums. I'll share the link with you, and also on our YouTube channel. So I've always liked to share this invitation to all of you. If you like to share your knowledge with the community in all things API and integrations, you're more than welcome to join the scenario. We would love to have you speaking in here. And yes, the session is being recorded. We'll make sure we share it with all of you. So with that, we can take questions throughout the session, but we would like to kindly ask you if we can keep it through at the end, or you can just start sharing those in the chat and we'll make sure we cover those. And if we run out of time, we can take those offline through the forum. With that, our speaker for today, if you joined last week's session, you know who David is. But for those who are joining for this session, and meeting David for the first time. David is an apigee customer engineer in our industry team in North America. He focuses on customers in financial services, and he's based in Colorado. He has been at Google for 6 years, and his background is in software development, API of platforms, and the financial industry. And today, David's going to present to us the developer journey so that you can master the design-first approach with Apigee API Hub. Welcome, everyone, and David, please take it over.
All right. Thank you, Alexandra, and thanks, everyone, for joining today. If you were on last week, you would have seen me and my colleague Aditya presenting. So I'm going to take over from my side here real quick, and then we are going to jump in. Give me 1 second to share. Right. Yeah, thanks again. Hopefully this screen will come up here in a minute. So last week we had a good session last week. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend that you go back and try and catch the recording or the replay of that. And we talked last week, Aditya and I, about a couple of different parts of the Apigee ecosystem. We covered the API hub, the role of the hub, and the developer portal, and we kind of talked about how those are complementary yet different in what they do, and we kind of walked through. You might have seen Aditya ran a demo where he showed how we can use both tools, how a developer can create APIs, register them in Hub to start the process of managing them. And then he moved into kind of how we then publish and make those things available through a developer portal for people to consume. And what we said there was, we kind of showed a more of a basic manual kind of approach. And what we want to do this week is kind of take that a bit further and look at more of a automated kind of life cycle that really begins with the journey of designing APIs first. So kind of trying to walk through like what it looks like for a developer, or what it could look like for a developer to begin creating brand new APIs, and then move those into the Apigee API Hub, and then actually take that all the way through to being available and then being documented in the portal and so on. Now I'm going to try and move through some slides here pretty quickly because I really want to spend more of the time on the demo as much as we can. Like Alexandra said, please feel free to ask questions. I have a lot to go through, and I may not catch all your questions in real time, but we'll try and get to them towards the end. So so let's jump in here real quick. So what are we kind of talking about here? This is going to be about the development life cycle of APIs, right? And you might have heard this term used a lot, the idea of what's called shifting left, which is kind of a pretty well-known term. But if you haven't heard of it, it's the idea that you should take more tasks in that development life cycle, whether it be things like QA reviews or security reviews, things that need to happen in the process of building an application or an API, and move them kind of further up front, do more things up front in the development life cycle. And that's a good idea. There's a lot of good reasons to try and do that, but for the developer, it doesn't necessarily make their life easier, because the further you move things to the front of the life cycle, the more it becomes a developer's kind of responsibility to handle, and that kind of that means more responsibility for them, and then maybe lower productivity in the end. Now, why is this important, right? In companies that do a lot with DevOps, or they require developers to handle a lot of stuff like infrastructure and administration, they actually end up being kind of prone to more delays, right? Like we said, it can lower developer productivity, right? There's some estimates here. This is from some of our platform engineering kind of research, that up to 40% of developer time can be spent on operational tasks, right? So not writing code, right? In other words, and that actually hinders their ability to innovate. It can slow things down. It can actually result in some cases in issues with security breaches, right? Because developers are trying to juggle lots of things outside of just writing the code. There is naturally more human error and the potential for misconfigurations that come about as a result of that. And then ultimately, right, again, it leads to kind of a lack of the ability to move quickly and innovate. So you may not have heard of this other term, or you may have heard of it, right, which we call shift down, right? So instead of, or in addition to shifting left, we talk about shifting down, which is take more advantage of technology and platforms that you have available, and take some of that burden off of the developer and shift it down into the platform, right? So make it kind of the responsibility or part of a platform infrastructure. And so if you spend any time, if you've spent any time looking at, this idea of platform engineering, this is going to be, a familiar term for you. But there's this idea of what's called golden paths, right, in the world of platform engineering. And we got this nice kind of image that gives you a visual of this here, right, which is we're in this forest. There's a lot of trees out there. It's murky. There's a lot of ways you could get lost in there, but we have this nice paved golden road through the forest, which we can follow, and we'll get out to the other side nice and quickly and safely, right? So think about that in terms of a developer's journey, right? We want to give them that nice golden path through the dark forest so that they can get to where they go quickly and easily, right? So what does that mean in terms of platform engineering? Think of it like giving people standardized tooling, sets of tools, best practices, ways that can guide them through whatever they're trying to do. In our case, what we're talking about is building APIs, right? So the platform team, is there to kind of pave that road, right? And come up with the recommended paths, right? To make the development lifecycle smoother, more efficient for the developer, and more secure, right, in the end. So this is all about getting rid of the friction for those developers, right? And we want to enable them to do the right thing. We don't want them to make mistakes. We want to give them some guardrails along that path so that they can't do things or step off the path and get lost, right? And we want to reduce the load, the cognitive load, right? The amount of things they have to focus on, right? So they can just do what they do best, which is building applications, building APIs. And that means mostly allowing them to stay in the environments and keep using the tools that they're used to, right? And not have to have them, context switch out to do something else, which is maybe not in their, in their wheelhouse, right? Just focus on core tasks. And we want to make it self-service for them as well, right? So this is not about putting the developers in, a straitjacket and not giving them any ability to try different things, right? But we do want to we want to point them in the right direction, right? And this is all about increasing, their autonomy, right? So if we can build in a smooth process where they don't have to keep going to other teams or people to ask for approvals, they're going to be able to move a lot quicker, right? So it's all about kind of, again, laying that, that path for them. And the goal here is, developers are going to return to working on the software, right? Not necessarily infrastructure or administering systems or things that are kind of outside of that goal. So what's in it for you? Why should you care about this, right? So here are some other stats from some of our platform engineering research, right? Teams that kind of invest in building these paths, building platform engineering discipline and teams to achieve this, they report a lot better scores on security, right? So 55% of organizations report their security is better as a result. Of course, developer productivity increases, and then velocity, right? So the developers get to do more, they get to move faster. And that means they get to actually ship and release and innovate and build better products for their customers. Now, this is all very applicable in the world of API management, right? So we're here talking about Apigee and APIs, right? And this is all very, very applicable there, right? So you've got software developers, API developers that are building APIs, right, in your organizations. And there are many things that go into that. API management is a big, area. There's a lot of things to consider around making sure that APIs are secure and have the right controls, have things like the right traffic management and usage limitations, and are well documented and discoverable, both by your internal developers and people from outside your organization, potentially. And there's a lot of best practices and reuse that you want to encourage in your APIs, right, as people are building them. And so you certainly don't want teams to go off within an organization and have to figure this out themselves every time and maybe go and try and rebuild all this stuff every time. You want to build a platform, an API platform, as part of your overall platform that helps them build out great APIs, right, that are pleasurable to use, right, by the people developing against them, and ultimately result in better products for your users, the end users, right? So this is really important here. And so API management, you want to try and incorporate that into that life cycle, right, the development life cycle. And we're going to go through kind of a journey for what that might look like. Now, I work with a lot of customers here in North America, some very large enterprise customers, and they, a lot of them have very big API programs with thousands of APIs that are built across many different teams, many parts of lines of business within their companies, and so a lot of the customers I work with have built some of these, these kind of pipelines or SDLC platforms, and that has allowed them to scale right to that level and be successful. But I've also worked with other customers that have not invested as much in this area, and it's pretty easy to tell the difference between them, right? Where you can see how the folks that don't invest and they kind of I should say burden the development teams with figuring out a lot of this themselves. They fail to scale their API programs. They fail to release new products right very quickly, and the difference is pretty clear. The customers that do it well are very successful. Now I'm going to show you what it could look like to kind of embed a life cycle here, and that's going to be powered by a bunch of our capabilities. I'm going to talk about API Hub, and we're going to talk about Gemini Code Assist as well, because that plays a role now in actually the creation and the design of APIs. But then it runs through the whole platform, right? So how do you actually then expose these APIs? How do you document them? Right, all of those parts we were kind of looking at last week. And then how do we make that more automated, right? So developers aren't having to do a lot of manual work. Now we did, we looked at Hub last week, and you may recall if you were on that one, that we mentioned that API Hub has this eventing model built into it, right? So it can actually become quite an important part of driving this life cycle. And if you weren't on the call last week, go back and watch it, learn about the Hub in general, kind of more about what it does and what it's for. But it is, it's a place to store and track information about all of your APIs, right, across their full life cycle. So any stage, whether it's an API that's brand new, an API that's been launched and is running in production for some time, or even APIs that have been retired. And as APIs move through that life cycle that's tracked in the Hub, you can trigger off or make things happen, and that might be driving kind of CI/CD processes. It might be approvals and governance checks, release checks. All those things can kind of be tracked, or at least automated through Hub's event-based model. So we're going to kind of look at how that works. But that's not the only thing here, right? So Apigee has a very powerful capability for you to automate the life cycle as a whole, right? So, as you build and create new APIs and deploy them to our runtime, our gateway as well, you can build that into a CI/CD, process and perform all the kind of steps like testing, and various types of testing that you might want to run. Of course, pushing the API docs as well, right? All of that can be automated in a number of ways, right? Apigee has its API that it exposes, which you can work with directly, but really the way we would recommend is that you use some of the other tools that we make available to enhance that or kind of complement that experience. So many of these things are using that API underneath. Here's a selection of tools. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these in detail here, but I'd recommend that you take a look at some of the names on this list. Maybe go off. They're all out there on GitHub, and you can go look at the projects. Now, in the demo that I'm going to do, it's going to exercise almost every single one of these tools actually is in this demo. And the one at the top is particularly interesting. It's called our apigee-go-gen. It's one of the newer tools that we published. And so we'll spend some time looking at how that helps right in this process. So let's look at this example demo, right? So imagine we've got three people here, right? Alice, Jared, and Bob. And so Alice is going to be our developer persona. And let's imagine that she is tasked with building a brand new API, right? So she has to design that thing from scratch. And we have this really awesome feature, which we're going to look at in a minute now, which is our Gemini Code Assist for helping design APIs, right? So that is an AI-powered assistant that can help Alice, come up with a new API design, and that happens inside her development environment, right, which is Cloud Code. Now, imagine she comes up with a design. Maybe she refines that design by hand a bit, and now she needs to move forward with it. She's going to actually start, developing the actual API, or maybe she has an initial design and she needs to get some feedback on it. Maybe in her organization, she needs to have that code reviewed or approved by someone perhaps from an API architecture or center of excellence team, whatever it might be, someone who's more familiar with kind of API best practices and design standards for her company. And so she needs a place to make that available with some information about what the API does. And what Alice can do is publish that into that hub, right? So the API hub that we looked at last week, right? So she can register it there, and that makes it visible and available for anyone in her organization who has access to the hub. They can see that there's this new version, this API that is being worked on. Now that eventing process that's in the hub, that can actually trigger an event when that happens. So when that new API is created, we can say maybe, hey, the review needs to go to Jared in this case. So let's say Jared is from that architecture team, and we can set up a workflow. In this example, I'm going to show you how you could do something with a tool like Jira. So imagine Jared's team has a queue, right, of these requests that come in. They look at their Jira dashboard and they see when people create APIs and want design reviews on them. And we can use tools like application integration to configure that workflow. And that workflow could get quite complex potentially on how an organization wants to set up their process. Or it could be as simple as an email, right, that gets sent. Now, imagine Jared goes through and he looks at that API and he uses the hub, right? He goes to the hub and he sees how that API has been designed. Maybe he works with Alice to kind of refine that. But then at some point, he says it looks good and he approves it. And now we want to be able to take that design, that API spec, and we're going to turn that into an actual API that is deployed in and available for someone to start consuming and testing. Now, let's say Alice is not really an Apigee expert, right? She's not part of the API platform team. She doesn't deeply understand Apigee. She's just focused on building her API. And we want to get that running as quick as possible without having to make Alice learn the ins and outs of Apigee and decide about what policies to apply and all this stuff. So we're going to automate all that through the CI/CD pipeline. And then when it's done, we're going to give Alice a GitHub repo. Everything's already good to go. And then it's already deployed in an Apigee environment, maybe even with a mock instance, mock data being returned initially. So you've got a working API, which someone can use. And then we can take the docs for that API, the spec, and we can publish that out to a portal so that the app developer, who's Bob here at the bottom, he can find the docs and he can learn how to use the API, and he can even try it out, right? So he can build an application against that proxy that we deployed in Apigee, and it will give him some mock data, and he can immediately start working on it. And then maybe at some future point, the back end for that new API becomes ready. Alice can very easily swap that out, and then instead of mock, it's returning the real thing. So that's the kind of the flow that we're going to walk through here. Now, I want to stress again, right? This is just one possible way of what I'm going to show you, one possible way of building this kind of flow, right? There are many different ways you could build a pipeline or your SDLC like this using the tools that are available in your organization. So I'm going to show you using application integration and cloud build and things like that. But you could just as easily leverage things like your own CI/CD tools, GitHub Actions, or whatever platform you use to kind of drive this. All right, so we're over here in Visual Studio Code. So I'm Alice at this point, and I'm needing to design this new API. So we have this very neat capability built in here. If you haven't looked at Cloud Code or Gemini Code Assist, I'd strongly recommend you go take a look. So inside VS Code, you can install the Cloud Code plugin, which supports, among other things, Apigee development. So you can build and test API proxies in a local environment here. But the other thing you can do if you have access to Gemini Code Assist is you can design APIs, right? So API specifications from scratch. And what we could do is, if we could ask Gemini just to make API specs, and it will come up with a design, but that design is probably going to be pretty generic, and it's not going to know necessarily about the APIs that we already have in our organization. That is where the Apigee comes in into the Gemini Code Assist piece itself, right? So we have this built-in tool here which connects to Apigee's API hub. So what I can do is say, Apigee, this is how I can invoke this tool. I can say, Apigee, create an API specification, and then I can give it just a natural language prompt, a description of the kind of API that I want. So let's say we want to create an API specification for a donut shop. It's breakfast here in where I am, so I'm thinking about donuts. So I'm going to make a specification for a donut shop API. And this is going to take a minute. The assistant is going to go off and it's thinking about that. But what it's doing is, because we're asking the Apigee tool, right, to help with this, it's going to go off and consult the contents of the API hub. So my organization's API hub, it is aware of that. So it's aware of the universe of APIs that I already have. And as it designs this API, it can draw from that existing universe, right? And incorporate elements of my current APIs into this design. So you can see it came back with a result here. And it says, okay, great, we've generated this API. It tells me about some of the endpoints that it's created. So you can see, it's come up with a list of customers, endpoint for getting customers and their information. There's another endpoint I can use to look up the kinds of donuts that are available in this from the shop. I can place orders, right, and do all that stuff. Now I could work on refining this. I could ask the assistant to add or change some things, and it will iterate and give me a new version. Or I can manually edit the spec over here in the editor here. And then we see on the right-hand side the actual, rendered result, which I can even try out over here, right? So, you can see there's this local mock server, right, that's been made available here. And so right out of the gate from the beginning, I can take an endpoint like this customer's endpoint here, and you can see I can try it out directly in my IDE. I get a mock result back right in here. So I can start to get a feel for what the API is going to look like. Maybe I want to tweak it, some more. Now over here on the left, you'll see that there are some schemas, right, that the assistant created. But you'll see below that, it's mentioning that there's some reused components as well, right? And this is where what we call that enterprise context from the hub comes in, right? So the assistant, again, knows about existing APIs that we have that might be relevant here, and it's going to take some of those elements and suggest them and add them into this design, right? And you can see under this reused components section here. right? So it's taken an order ID schema. We've got a customer ID schema. Maybe we have some other APIs. Maybe we have a coffee shop API as well. And that has orders and customers, and those entities already exist. And they're well-known, formats, models for that, entity. So it's going to bring them in, and that gives Alice as a developer the head start, right? Now she might choose to, maybe one of the things it suggests isn't what she needs, and she might replace that with something else. But this puts her in a good position right from the beginning. And the other thing it's included here is it's included security schemas, right? So it's added a security mechanism based on what is already in use across the APIs. In this case, just API key authentication, but it might be something else, right? If the standard is something like OAuth, right, for example. So we've already got security kind of built in to this design from the beginning. The other thing that the assistant can do is help you detect duplicates, right? So if it thinks that you're maybe designing an API that already is there, maybe there's already a donut shop API and somebody already created that, the assistant can tell you about that and says, hey, you might want to go and check this one out because there's already an API that looks like this. And so that is preventing, ideally, your developers from recreating and duplicating these APIs. If you don't have a way to pick up on that, you end up with a lot of sprawl and a lot of duplication, right? So together, the hub and the assistant are really, helping you kind of control that sprawl. Right, so we've got our design here. Now, let's go to the next step. So now Alice needs to actually make that available for someone to try out. Now, what we can do here is publish directly to the hub. And so we can do that from within the UI here. And it's going to ask me to provide some info. It's kind of pre-populated some of this stuff based on the spec. I'm going to have to put in my email here. So we'll enter that. And we've got our API version. And then you can see down here is the lifecycle stage. Now, this is a brand new API. It's just an idea at this point. So I'm going to leave it as concept, right? But there are these other stages that you could set as well. But we'll set this as concept, and we're going to go ahead and publish that into the API hub. And so what is going to happen here in a moment is that life cycle that we saw, that automation is going to start to trigger off, right? And this is where this application integration piece is going to come in. So now let's jump over, and in a moment, if this works correctly, we should see here on this Jira board that we've got a brand new API that just showed up. It's our donut shop API. So now I've kind of switched persona. Imagine I'm Jared now. So I'm on the architecture kind of review team, and I go in, it's I start my day and I look on the board to see if there's any new APIs. And there's one here, it's this donut shop. And you can see there's kind of, this is like a Kanban approach here, right? We've got some APIs that need review. Maybe we have some that are currently in review. Maybe, we have some that were rejected and others that might have been approved, right? So let's go and look at this entry. Again, you might choose to use a different tool for tracking these kind of requests. You might just send emails to people to do this. This is a bit more of maybe a structured way that you could kind of set this up and manage things like this at scale. This actually we created for a customer of mine who was struggling with this process, and we wanted to try and kind of automate this thing. And they were using Jira to track, but they were doing it in a very manual way. This is kind of all streamlined and automated, right? So we see here, we've got this new request. There's a new API design proposal requires a review. Maybe we can point the reviewer towards some, standards, internal standards, right? So they can go and look at refresh on what makes a good design if they need to. They can ask questions. And then down here, you'll see there's a link to the actual API itself in the hub. And so we can follow this, and it will take us over to the hub. Now, what I'm going to do real quick, because it's going to kick off a process, it's going to take a few minutes. Let's actually just do the review. So let's imagine Jared has gone through the process. He's looked at the API, and he's going to start his review, and then he has the option to either reject it, which will send back to the developer and tell them they need to do some more work, or he's going to approve it, right? So let's just say he approves it. And that's going to kick off the next step in the process on the background. While that's happening, let's go look at the API in the hub, right? So now with Jared, we've clicked on our review. It's taken us over to the hub. We're in the hub here. So this is the API hub, and we have our entry. So Jared, like I was trying to explain, can come in here. He can look at the spec, right? He can look at that design. He can see any of these linting errors or warnings, right, which the hub is going to provide. That gives him a very quick idea whether this API is conformant or designed right. Now, what I was just saying there when you let me know that you couldn't see it, there's no deployments here, right? So this API isn't deployed anywhere yet. It's just a spec in the hub, right? It hasn't been created. So there's no proxy, there's no Apigee environment yet, but there is about to be, right? So if we go over to my email here, we should see, so now imagine I'm Alice again, right? So we kind of switch back. Jared did his approval. And we see Alice has gotten this email, and it says your API design has been approved. It's ready for development. And here's the important part. You're going to get a repo. A code repo is being created for you. You don't have to do it yourself. There's an automation that's going to take care of that, and you'll get a link for it when it's ready. And in fact, we already got the link. So here we can see that your repo for API Donut Shop is ready. And here's a GitHub repo link. And it even tells us, if you want to clone the repo, all you need to do is run this command. So we can go and look at the contents of this repo, and you can see that it was just created just 2 minutes ago, right? So while we were talking there, the repo got scaffolded out. And you can see there's a bunch of stuff in here already for us, right? We'll see some build files, right, that are used by the CI/CD system. We can see we've got our spec in here, specification that was created by the assistant, and it was pushed into the hub. Now we have it here in the source repo. We've also got this other neat part in here, which we'll maybe come back to in a minute, which is an overlay file. So if you're familiar with the idea of overlays in OpenAPI specification, overlays give you a way to augment or supplement an existing spec. So maybe you've got some specific vendor extensions or settings or descriptions or examples that you want to add into a spec, but you don't want to include it for whatever reason in the main file itself. You can use these overlays, and we're gonna show how these can be used here. Now, also in here, and this comes back to Hassan's question, is the proxy itself. So how can we actually automate and create the proxy? And this is where that tool comes in that I mentioned called there's some background noise from someone. If you could mute your mic.
Yeah.
Great. So this is where the apigee-go-gen tool comes in that I mentioned on that previous slide. And what is apigee-go-gen? It is a really awesome tool that one of our team members developed. I give a shout out to Miguel, who made this tool. It is a CLI, so it's a command line tool, but it gives developers a way to define their APIs, their Apigee APIs, their proxies, using a templating kind of format, right? If you've ever looked at Go templating, so Go style templating, it makes use of that. And it uses a YAML based or a YAML centric format, right? So if you've spent time developing Apigee proxies, you know that most of that is done inside XML, right? But a lot of developers would rather work in a format like YAML, which is easier to read. This allows you to define your proxy templates, and then the tool can be used to generate proxy configurations for them. And it becomes it's a very, very powerful mechanism of actually standardizing your API definitions, your proxy formats, your policies, right? And then creating those. And so your platform teams can generate these templates. And there are some examples on our GitHub, and here's the one that I'm using kind of inside this repo here. So this has been created by the platform team, and it's been put in, generated into the repo for our developer. Now, the developer Alice, who maybe isn't an Apigee expert, doesn't necessarily need to understand this, right? So all of this has just been put in there for her. So it's generated a template based on her API specifications. This will correspond to, this will create a proxy that corresponds to her API with all of the required Apigee policies already in there, right? So you can see things like spike arrest policies, or API key verification policies, or spec validation policies, right? Error handling, and so on. All these things can be defined by the platform team, right? Who understands Apigee and is building, these paths, and then it's simply injected into her, into her repo here, right? Now, maybe Alice is an Apigee expert and she can go in and tweak, and that may need the approval of the platform team to change things, right? But again, remember the idea here is Alice is just focusing on her API design, and all of this proxy stuff is kind of, she doesn't have to think about it, right? It's all kind of just there and ready. Now there's some other stuff in here as well, right? We've got maybe tests. So let's say we want to do some integration testing. Those could even be stubbed out and included in this repo as well, right? So everything that Alice needs is kind of already there for her. And so if we go back to our email, and it says, we can clone this repo. So let's go over, we'll do this in a different window here. We're going to clone the repo off of GitHub. And so now we have the code locally. So I'm Alice. All I needed to do was publish my API to the hub. It got approved. And now I've got this repo. I can go in here. I've got my spec. Maybe I want to, maybe I'm going to go in and make a change here. I'm just going to update the contact info to me. Let's say it's Alice instead. All right, so now we're going to commit a change. And I'll do that real quick. Update contact. And then we'll commit that and we'll push that back to GitHub. And that is going to trigger the next kind of step, right, of our process, right? So if we now go back, what we'll see actually in the hub, if we refresh, this API here, you'll notice that the lifecycle stage of this API has moved on, right? So the hub, when Jared approved that, we went from a concept, which was the original state. We're now in a developed state, and Alice has now got the code. She's made a change, and that's kicked off the build of the proxy itself, right? And in a few minutes, we're going to see that appear. Now, what is happening under the covers here is we should see a cloud build job that's running, right? So this is a CI/CD job based on repo, right? So trigger for that repo. So that's going to take a few minutes to complete. So what I want to do here is kind of, let's peer under the hood a bit at what actually has been happening here. How has this automation all kind of been happening, right? So the first step on this, if you remember it, when Jared approved the API, what created that repo, right? So we are using, I'm using a capability of the hub, the eventing capability. So if we go look at event arc over here, so this is the mechanism by which the hub emits the events, the things that are happening. So we've got an event here for a spec being created, right? So when a spec is created, right, uploaded from a developer, we get an event and we can trigger something to happen there, right? And so what we're triggering is an application integration flow in this case, right? So you can send events off to different places. You can use tools like workflows or PubSub or whatnot, but we're going to use app integration, and that's what we're going to use to orchestrate that Jira, record, adding that record and kind of responding to that process. So again, you can choose to use other tools to orchestrate this process if you want, but this is kind of one way you can do this with application integration as well, right? Which is very, good at kind of allowing you to build these kind of workflows. And you can see this is what actually happened under the covers. We got that event arc trigger, right? So that event from the hub when that new spec was created, and we performed some steps here to get information about that API. And then we can create that Jira issue, right? And we do that in application integration using the built-in connectors, right, that we have. So we create that Jira issue, add some more information to it. And then when the reviewer, Jared, when he did that approval, it triggered this part of the integration flow. We have a trigger that can pick up, when something changes in Jira. And this is where we then update that version in the API hub, the lifecycle state of that version, depending on whether Jared approved or rejected the design. So he approved the design, and it updated the state, and it triggered that repo creation. So it started a build job to scaffold out and create the GitHub repo that we see here. Right, and then it emailed the developer, right? So that was that process. Now we're in this other process here, which is we committed a code change, and this build job then kicked in, and this is actually taking that spec, and it is using the go-gen utility to actually build the proxy bundle, right, from that template. And then it might run through some other steps. So maybe there's some quality checks on the API, and that's where some of our other tools come in, like apigeelint. So we can look at that resulting proxy bundle and do extra checking, right, to make sure that the result is following best practices here. And you can see this one has it has one warning about the way we've defined the cause policy in that template. Maybe there's something we want to look at there. But if this all succeeds, we run through, tests pass, right? We create a proxy, and then we push that into Apigee, right? So we actually deploy it. And then we're going to push docs as well. So the actual dev portal docs, right? So now that build job ran and it completed. And so if we go and actually look in Apigee itself, right? So now we're out of the hub and we're in the proxy view. If we look for donut shop, I might have to refresh my page here. We should see that there is a proxy that has been created. Here it is. So donut shop API is there. It was created 3 minutes ago and it was deployed. So we can go in and look at this, and we'll see our first revision here. Now, the way this template was set up was to create a mock version first off. So the first iteration of this design, there is no back end yet. So we just have this mock, and one of the really neat things that go-gen tool does is allow you to, it will create a mock API for you. And so it's based on the contents of this specification, which is embedded here in the proxy, right? And so what we can do, this has already been deployed. So the developer can go and actually try and call the API. So imagine, I've got my Postman client here. I've created an API request, and I can send a call in here. And you can see I got a response back, right? And it's a mocked response here, right? So immediately my API is there. I can start calling it. It's not real data, but it gives me something, to work with, right? And this is like a remote mock, right? So the developer can actually do this, outside of just, the one we saw Alice there. Anyone could try and hit this. Now, the other step that build job performed was pushing the documentation, right? So imagine the organization has a developer portal where people who want to use that API, this is where they come to find them, right? So again, producers can find this stuff in the hub, right? But a consumer, maybe it's even someone, on a different part of the business, maybe they're not using that hub. They want to come in and find the API in this catalog, and then they want to actually, try it out. So we can see that we have this donut shop API has now appeared in the portal as well. So the pipeline pushed these docs, and you can see it is that same endpoint. And we've got all of our operations from the spec, and we can actually, even come and try it out in here, right? So we can make requests to an endpoint, and that should use the same mock server, right? The same mocking capability that's built into that proxy, right? So immediately, anyone can start to try this. And now we've gone through that whole kind of life cycle, and all we had to do, right? So all Alice had to do was come up with a design, and she got assistance from Gemini to do that. It incorporated existing standards, right, from the organization. She had a review process. All that was automated. Alice didn't really have to do anything. It was very easy for Jared to follow through, and do that review. And then at the end of that, Alice got the code. She didn't have to figure out anything about how to create this repo, or what policies or controls, security mechanisms to include. All of that was kind of just predefined, and everything got deployed into the Apigee environment for her. Alice didn't have to come into the Apigee console or do anything by hand. And then there was a working API, right, that Bob, our consumer, could find in this portal, and he can immediately start, prototyping or developing against that thing. So that is one example of a golden path, right, for a platform team, an API platform team might build. There is more to this that we probably don't have time to cover here, especially around all the neat things you can do with these templates, right? So the apigee-go-gen templates. There are some abilities for the developer to apply overlays in here, like we mentioned, right? So just very simple attributes that can then be used by these templates to adjust the proxy behavior. So we could set a simple attribute to, control like the rate limit, the spike arrest rate limit, or turn on logging, a logging policy. And the developer doesn't have to like know how to implement an Apigee logging policy, or they don't have to really know about how to implement something like spike arrest in Apigee, because these templates and this framework is going to take care of deploying all of that for them. So we keep the developer focused on, how do they design and build the API, and then the platform team, the API team, the Apigee experts are the ones who kind of build out their side of it, their framework, and we have this nice kind of clean separation of duty. So that was the demo, and hopefully that gave you some idea of the art of the possible. And I know we've got a minute left and probably a bunch of questions. So let's see.
Yes, we do. Thank you for that great demo, David. It was pretty insightful, really easy to digest. So we can stay a few minutes. Before I jump into the questions, everyone, I open a poll so that you can rate the session. That feedback is really valuable for us so that we can keep on delivering these sessions. With that, the question we have in here, well, it's more of a comment. If we can share the links when we archive the session, is that something we can share, David? The ones you were sharing on your screen?
The links to the tooling, yes, we can definitely share those.
Great.
There was, I see a question about mocking means redacting. No, mocking, Mahendra, means like creating a kind of a simulated response, right? So kind of a fake response that represents the design. Like before the real thing is ready, you might want to create a mock or a simulated representation of the request, and that's what that go-gen tool offers. There are other ways to do mocking. There are plenty of other frameworks. But apigee-go-gen has that kind of built in, and so it makes it very easy to build mock proxies in Apigee. Hassan asked about, there are many different types of authentication, like API key. How would those be accommodated? Yep, absolutely. You could certainly implement another kind, right? And the way this worked, in fact, I will share my repo again real quick. So the way this template worked, you'll see that we defined verify API key policy in here, right? Now you could use Apigee's OAuth policy, right, for example, and you could define that in your template, and then that will be implemented in your proxy instead. And the really cool thing here is this is where the power of this templating language comes in. Is I'm using the scheme that is defined in the spec itself to dictate what kind of authentication is implemented in the proxy, right? So we're looking at the spec, which says, this API uses API key auth, right? So this is standard open API terminology, right? So Alice would understand that. She's like, okay, I'm using API key auth, but maybe she doesn't know how that actually gets implemented in Apigee, like what policy enforces that. The platform team can just define that, right, in the template. They might say if the security schema in the spec is OAuth, then apply the OAuth policy, right? And all this can be templated out in here. So it's very, very powerful. There was a question about the design UI. The one I showed you, is it only Gemini Code Assist? So what we offer on Apigee, right, is through Google's Gemini Code Assist, and that has that integration with the API Hub built in, right? So you get that if you have Gemini Code Assist. You do need the enterprise license, right, to connect that to Apigee. But that is then out of the box. Of course, you can could try and design your own coding assistant, your own AI assistant, or maybe even an agent, and kind of build that out yourself. But that might take a bit more work. Let's see. Will there be a session on go-gen? That's a good question. I think we should definitely look at maybe having another deep dive on that in a future session. Mike asked, you showed Gemini helped Alice with code assistant using Apigee. It looks like it's pulling API definitions from the hub. That's correct. That's what it was doing. How would customers that have that Apigee solution that was done before API Hub get to a point to use it successfully and get information into the hub? That is a great question. And that actually is going to be the topic of next week's session with Christoph, who is going to talk about API Hub and plugins and how information gets into the hub for your existing APIs. So definitely come and tune in next week. Can we use apigee-go-gen with an Azure DevOps pipeline, says Hassan? Absolutely. It is a CLI tool. You could incorporate it into any pipeline that's able to run something from the command line. And in fact, most of the tools that we used in this demo, they can be built into any, pretty much any CI/CD platform, right? Even we used Maven plugins as part of this pipeline to push the proxy. Pretty much every DevOps or CI/CD tool can run Maven, so easy to incorporate. Can we expect a more comprehensive set of examples for apigee-go-gen in the future, says How. I think, I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name right. There is a, go check out the apigee-go-gen website. There is examples in there and on the GitHub as well, right? And we will look at publishing, maybe some more extensive set if that would help as well. Mahendra, mock API explanation. Thanks for that. For the observability space, if there are metrics, logs, or traces being ingested, including the alert mechanism, is there a way to easily fetch the data via an API built using Apigee? If you mean the usage data of the API that was created, then that's available from Apigee through the analytics capability that's built in, right? So Apigee gives you out-of-the-box dashboards to track how the API is being used. If that wasn't your question, then please let me know. Asif asks, if we have enterprise Apigee, can I use apigee-go-gen? Absolutely. Apigee-go-gen is open source, freely available. Anyone can use it. It will work with any version of Apigee, right? You can build your templates to define proxies that will work anywhere. All right. One more question from Morton. Was the mock running via a feature in the API Hub? Not exactly, right? So there are kind of two mocks that we saw in the demo. One, the first mock was in Visual Studio Code, right? So it was inside the, when we used Gemini to define the API, and it presented us that design. There was a built-in mock server running on the developer's workstation, right, which they could start to interact with. Now the API design came from or was influenced by the hub, so kind of indirectly, right, the hub was helping to create that first mock. The second mock was the one that was built into the proxy that got deployed, and that was done by apigee-go-gen, which again was using the spec, right? So the spec format was used to kind of drive the mock. Last one here. Hal says, I've gone through the examples in a Git repo. They were not as helpful as the example you just showed. So yeah, we'll look at trying to create maybe a public version of this demo. We have some other ones already that use platforms like GitHub Actions to automate that pipeline. A lot of what I showed was kind of Google centric, and is not all people have access to an environment to easily try that. So we do have some other samples that Christoph has published around doing this with GitHub, which is maybe a bit easier for some people to try out, and we can share that. Asif, how GitHub repo creation and deployment CI/CD implementation, configure, and where, because we did this manually. Yeah, so that is, yeah, there was a lot of stuff. We didn't get to show all of the plumbing, right? I didn't get to show you all of the plumbing on how those build jobs, you know, were created. Maybe that's something that we can share in a public repo in an upcoming or on an upcoming session. All right. I know we're a bit over time, but these are great questions. Thank you all for the awesome questions. Alexandra, do we want to take it home? I'll let you.
Yes, we'll wrap it up. And also thanks to you, David, for covering all of these great insights that the community has asked. And to all of you, thank you for chiming in and joining this session of today. I just want to wrap up that if you'd like to take these discussions further, or if you have another question you would like to ask, feel free to engage with us via this new community site we have developed for you. You have the QR codes in here, but I'm also going to ping those links in the chat for you. This new site is now named the Google Developer Program Forums, formerly the Google Cloud Community. So we'll be happy to see you around in there, and you will see that Apigee has now 3 subcategories for you, in which you can take a look at events, your knowledge hub, all central status for all technical content, how-to videos, tutorials, etc. from Google curated content. And last but not least, news and announcement. We actually got a release now Runtime that it was drafted by Megan Bruce, one of our product managers in Apigee. So you can take a look at that as well. And if you're looking into application integration examples, you can go to the integration services community space. We'd love to see you in there engaging with us. With that, thanks so much for this amazing session. We'll make sure we share the recording and the links with you as soon as possible. And again, thank you so much, David, for this great presentation to the community.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you joining. Have a great day.
We see you soon. Bye-bye.
See ya.